For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant, a species from a turbulent world, physically fragile, politically fragmented, socially unpredictable. In the archives of the Galactic Council, humanity was a footnote, minor intelligence, unstable governance, limited strategic relevance. Their first ventures into interstellar space were hesitant, marred by internal disputes and fleeting alliances. To the galaxy, they were inconsequential, ignored by the galaxy, dismissed by those in power. The Council had long studied danger. Threats announced themselves loudly: massive fleets, ideological campaigns, demands for recognition. Humanity did none of that. They argued among themselves, failed publicly, rebuilt slowly. Progress came in fits and starts, often interrupted by crises that seemed to confirm every pessimistic forecast. To the galaxy, this meant safety. No one realized how dangerous that assumption was. Because humanity did not evolve under stability. They evolved under collapse. History had trained humans to endure when systems failed. Governments dissolved overnight. Economies imploded. Alliances shattered in the worst possible moments. Survival was never guaranteed. It had to be earned repeatedly, through adaptation, ingenuity, and endurance. Humans learned early that rules could vanish, that authority could fail, that rescue was never assured. So when humanity finally returned to galactic attention, they did not arrive with entitlement or defiance. They observed. They listened. They studied how power functioned beyond speeches and charters. They noticed something the galaxy had long ignored. The galaxy was not shaped by the strongest. It was shaped by the resilient. Humanity did not seek approval. They did not wait for permission. They prepared. Quietly. Deliberately. Decades passed. Human systems grew stronger while the galaxy assumed weakness. Trade rerouted itself internally. Infrastructure adapted. Local industries expanded into roles once dependent on interstellar supply. Knowledge and innovation spread quietly, beyond the scrutiny of councils and empires. They appeared fragile. They looked inconsequential. They were invisible. And the Council, confident in its oversight, certain in humanity's limitations, never questioned the anomaly. Because silence had always been mistaken for weakness. But the truth is far more dangerous. Humanity did not collapse under isolation. They did not fracture under pressure. They did not wait for validation from powers that dismissed them. They endured. They adapted. They prepared. And when the first true threat emerged, a force capable of overwhelming civilizations before the Council could respond, humanity was ready. The Council finally understood what it had long ignored. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been underestimated. And underestimating humanity was a mistake the galaxy would never survive twice. First came the trade restrictions. Shipping corridors were flagged for extended inspection. Docking permissions were delayed or denied. Insurance networks quietly reclassified human vessels as high risk, collapsing commerce without technically breaking any law. Trade was cut. Critical resources slowed, then disappeared entirely. Medical compounds, advanced alloys, precision components. Peripheral colonies felt it first, then core worlds. Prices climbed. Shortages spread. Council analysts were calm. They had seen this pattern countless times. Scarcity led to unrest. Unrest led to internal division. Division restored order, or at least compliance. Then came the legal measures. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost access to council chambers. Observer status was suspended under vague language, pending review. Data networks that once returned open intelligence now delivered filtered fragments or silence. Travel permits expired. Diplomatic channels collapsed into automated acknowledgments. Humanity was not being punished. They were being erased. Isolation followed naturally. No fleets blockaded Earth. No weapons darkened human skies. The Council did not need brute force. They simply removed humanity from the systems that maintained influence, trade, legitimacy, oversight, and waited. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the quiet confidence of an authority that had done this many times before. The Council expected collapse. They expected humanity's internal divisions to resurface under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected governments to fracture and blame one another. Expected appeals for reinstatement once reality set in. Timelines were projected. Months to instability. 1 year to unrest. 2 years to submission. But the collapse never came. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human systems stabilized. Emergency measures activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted quietly, without debate. Rationing was applied efficiently and calmly. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Communication traffic surged, but not with protest. With coordination. Political rivals shared data without treaties or announcements. Old disputes were paused, not resolved, but rendered irrelevant. Council analysts noticed anomalies, then dismissed them. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had rehearsed this scenario its entire history. Economic crashes, political failures, environmental disasters, systems breaking when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't shocking. It was familiar. Humanity did not appeal to council morality, did not threaten retaliation, did not beg for intervention. They did something far more destabilizing. They adapted. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced. Older technologies were revived, redesigned, and scaled beyond what council regulations had allowed. Every rule was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole exploited without technically violating a statute. Sanctions meant to isolate human space began rippling outward, quietly damaging council-aligned economies dependent on human adaptability. The council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter, more ordered, more deliberate. Reports began noting a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient, less responsive to pressure, less dependent on authority that only functioned when it was believed in. Containment worked because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, an uncomfortable truth began to surface, one no one was yet willing to speak aloud. Intervention only works on those who still care to respond. Humanity no longer did. And with that, the Council's carefully applied grip, the quiet, confident measures intended to correct and control, began to slip. Not because it was resisted, but because it was ignored. Isolation was supposed to break humanity. That was the Council's assumption. History had shown that when a civilization was cut off from trade, oversight, and external legitimacy, old rivalries resurfaced. Cooperation dissolved. Division restored order in the absence of authority. Humanity should have fractured. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the shift was subtle. Political rhetoric softened. Ideological battles that had raged for generations began to lose relevance. Leaders who had thrived on division found their audiences shrinking, not because people agreed, but because argument no longer mattered. When the last sanctioned trade lanes went silent, humanity stopped asking who was right. They asked who would survive. Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders remained on maps, but they no longer dictated behavior. Rival governments paused conflicts that had lasted centuries, without treaties, without announcements, without celebration. Humanity did not glorify unity. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external stabilizer to rely on. No council fleet arriving to enforce order if systems failed. Humanity was alone. And once that truth settled in, priorities aligned with ruthless clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of expanding bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Redundant authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for dominance, but streamlined for speed. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, Every major colony operated under a single operational framework. Not ideology, not culture, not ambition. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a singular ruler. It was a system, lean, adaptive, intolerant of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige evaporated. Ego became a liability overnight. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research institutions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in scale, but in purpose. Fleets once designed to deter rivals were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Every person became part of the system, not as a soldier, but as a stabilizing component. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. Then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Communication traffic decreased, not because activity stopped, but because coordination became efficient. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them precise, focused, unsettlingly calm. Council analysts misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted isolation. That exclusion had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was at stake. Isolation did what no treaty ever could. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And in that quiet, deliberate moment, unnoticed by those who assumed humanity would fracture, the galaxy began to realize the Council had misjudged the most dangerous species it had ever overlooked. Humanity would not break. They would endure. Together. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements. No displays of power. No signals meant to draw attention. Humanity had learned that visibility invited intervention, and intervention invited control. So they worked where no one was looking. Isolation stripped away distraction. Research institutions that once competed for prestige reorganized into cooperative networks. Projects stalled by politics were revived and accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for ideal conditions and began designing for inevitability, assuming systems would fail, supply lines would vanish, and help would never arrive. New engines came first. Not engines built for speed or conquest, but for endurance. Propulsion systems capable of operating for years without resupply. Drives tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvisation. Human ships sacrificed elegance for reliability, favoring designs that could limp forward rather than die spectacularly. They could travel farther without support. They could remain operational without permission. They no longer needed anyone to authorize their movement. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored singular, overwhelming barriers, structures that either held perfectly or collapsed catastrophically. Humanity rejected that philosophy. They layered everything. Adaptive fields reshaped under stress. Redundant systems degraded gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Structural composites absorbed force rather than attempting to negate it outright. Human shields were not invincible. They were persistent. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons followed, but quietly. Humanity did not pursue extravagant superweapons. They focused on systems that could function after prolonged isolation. Weapons that could be repaired in deep space by exhausted crews with minimal tools. Human weapons were not flashy. They were dependable. Then came the fleets. They were not assembled in massive, centralized shipyards that could be catalogued and destroyed. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular, interchangeable, resilient. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Naval doctrine evolved alongside them. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, guided by shared principles rather than constant orders. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood emergency repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the baseline. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for vengeance. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to diplomacy. Victory was redefined. Not to defeat the enemy. To ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That isolation had capped growth. That intervention had succeeded. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond assumption and observation. And when the galaxy finally looked back, when something emerged that oversight could not restrain, it would not find a fragile civilization desperate for attention. It would find a species that had spent years preparing for the universe to act without mercy. Because while the Council assumed weakness, humanity had been preparing for survival. Then a new enemy appeared, the Dominion. It arrived silently at first. A single system failed to transmit routine data. No distress call. No debris. Analysts assumed equipment failure. By the time the second system went dark, the pattern was unmistakable. Refugees streamed from border worlds, carrying fragmented telemetry and terrified reports. The name on every trembling lip was the same: Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They conquered. The Dominion was not a coalition, not a federation. It was an empire optimized for expansion, fleets honed over centuries, doctrines perfected for speed, efficiency, and permanence. They moved like a machine, overwhelming defenses before panic could even organize. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms collapsed within minutes. Planetary shields failed under methodical, unrelenting pressure. Defense fleets disassembled in sequence, not in heroic last stands, but with surgical precision. Infrastructure was seized intact. The Dominion did not destroy. They claimed. Species were enslaved. Not exterminated, catalogued. Administrators retained under supervision. Labor forces reassigned. Entire cultures reduced to productivity metrics and compliance thresholds. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed. Quietly. Efficiently. Permanently. Fear spread faster than the invasion itself. Council-aligned fleets deployed to counter the Dominion vanished. Signals cut mid-transmission. Formations dissolved. Command networks failed. Nothing stopped the invasion. And still, the Council argued. Emergency assemblies convened and collapsed under procedural paralysis. Voting blocks debated jurisdiction, proportional response, and emergency authority, while live feeds displayed cities burning and evacuation corridors clogged with refugees. Some delegates proposed negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few argued for sacrifice, ceding outer systems to save the inner core. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts advanced, Council authority fractured. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear outpaced cooperation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became undeniable. The oldest authority in the galaxy was losing control of a crisis it could not regulate. That was when a voice broke the chaos. Humanity. Objections erupted. Humanity had been isolated, sanctioned, excluded. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their civilization, according to Council projections, should have fractured under isolation years ago. But some remembered. Humanity had gone quiet long before the Dominion arrived. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate appeals for reinstatement. Just absence, orderly, deliberate absence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message was measured, precise, urgent but not desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need to restore balance against a threat that had already demonstrated its disregard for oversight. It did not mention sanctions. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity studied. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrine. Supply throughput. Patterns of command and behavior. Internal simulations mirrored reality with eerie precision. The Council expected panic. They received silence. Hours passed. Then days. Another system fell, close enough to the Council core that evacuation alerts echoed through the chambers themselves. Delegates who had argued procedural nuance moments earlier now pleaded for assistance. When humanity finally replied, the message was calm, measured, almost unsettling in its restraint. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed Council defenses would fail. They stated plainly, they possessed the capability to engage. There was no promise of rescue. Only assessment. The Council protested. Invoked duty. Demanded urgency. Reminded humanity of shared stakes. Humanity did not hurry, because the truth was unavoidable. The Council had built a system where intervention meant control, and control required compliance. The Dominion ignored compliance. It did not fear authority. It did not respond to sanctions. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had prepared for a universe where oversight failed was the one that had thrived without it. As another Council world burned, the oldest authority in the galaxy confronted a reality it had never imagined. Intervention did not stop the Dominion. Procedure did not slow it. Balance did not restrain it. Only preparation could. With no leverage remaining and no illusions left, the Council did something it had never done before. It stopped trying to control, and instead it asked, not as an authority, not as a stabilizer, but as a witness to its own limits. They turned to humanity, because when systems burned and procedure failed, when nothing else could respond in time, humanity was the only civilization ready. And in that moment, the Council finally realized what it had always underestimated. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been ignored. The Council expected forgiveness. They sent appeals, carefully phrased assurances, reminders of shared responsibility, and appeals to protocol. They assumed that, like every other species before, humanity would bend under the weight of expectation, under centuries of authority and precedent. They were wrong. Humanity responded calmly. Not with anger. Not with defiance. Not with argument. A single sentence crossed every channel. We will decide when to act. No conditions. No explanations. No request for permission. Just resolve. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted about duty, morality, and collective survival. Some accused humanity of arrogance, others of cruelty. A few attempted to invoke charters and sanctions, powers that had once guaranteed obedience. Humanity did not respond. They didn't need to, because authority ceases to exist the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories detected subtle anomalies. Not weapons fire, not fleet movements. Something quieter, almost imperceptible. Gravitational sensors recorded rhythmic distortions too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent along impossible vectors, as if space itself were adjusting to a presence beyond comprehension. Council engineers blamed calibration drift. They were wrong. Independent traders reported enormous silhouettes appearing briefly beyond sensor resolution, too large to classify, too controlled to dismiss. Not fleets assembling, but structures aligning. Patterns forming across regions too vast to be coincidence. Humanity was not rushing to war. They were positioning. A final, unencrypted transmission arrived. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time, the Council confronted a truth it could not regulate. Humanity did not need permission, did not fear reprisal, did not confuse urgency with obligation. And then, on the edges of Dominion-controlled space, a tremor ran through the void. The Dominion slowed. Not halted, not repelled, just slowed, enough for commanders to notice inconsistencies in predictive models that had never failed. Enough to feel resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast had aligned. Space itself began to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood what the Council had just realized. Forgiveness is offered by those who seek approval. Permission is requested by those who still believe in authority. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because the Council asked. It would be because humanity decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never realized the war had begun. There was no surge in subspace. No spike in energy signatures. No alarms screaming across sensors. One moment, Dominion armadas advanced through occupied systems with mechanical precision, formations perfected over centuries of unchecked conquest. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. There was no flare, no rippling distortion in subspace announcing their presence. They simply resolved into existence, immense, deliberate shapes unfolding from the dark as if reality itself had made room for them. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations defied every doctrine the Dominion had ever known. They were not arrayed for attack or intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing approach corridors and escape vectors the Dominion had not yet considered critical. This was not a battle line. It was containment. Dominion sensors struggled to reconcile the data. Targeting solutions lagged behind reality. Command algorithms recalculated endlessly, unable to explain how an opposing force of that scale had appeared without triggering a single early warning threshold. Before a single firing order could be issued, every communication channel ignited at once. Primary command bands. Encrypted tactical relays. Emergency fallback networks. One message crossed all simultaneously. Stand down. It was not amplified. It carried no threat. It carried certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening salvo never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy, they absorbed it. Layered shields reshaped in real time, dispersing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than negate it. Power that should have shattered any known hull simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never fired again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by imperceptible fractions of a second, individually negligible but catastrophic in combination. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Dominion command structures unraveled. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers flooded dead channels, unable to comprehend why redundancies that had never failed before had betrayed them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting its assumptions. Assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never considered them vulnerable. Systems flawless against weaker civilizations, catastrophic against an opponent built entirely around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no insignia, no declaration of authority. Just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands, no negotiations. The statement was final. As the signal propagated, Dominion fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, unsure whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to end the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And in that moment, the truth became undeniable. Humanity had never been weak. They had only been underestimated. And underestimating humanity was a mistake the galaxy would never survive twice. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency assemblies convened. Charters dusted off. Committees formed. Every procedural tool in the galaxy's oldest bureaucracy was deployed to reassert authority over a civilization that had quietly surpassed expectation. The galaxy listened. Then it moved on. It was too late. Authority only matters when it is obeyed. Worlds rebuilt without Council approval. Defense compacts formed laterally, between neighbors who had watched procedure fail while systems burned. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the corridors the Council once regulated. The Council still existed, but it no longer decided what happened next. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They refused permanent leadership, declined seats of expanded authority, ignored proposals to reorganize galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, imposed no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back, not into obscurity, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark in patterns no strategist could fully map. They did not patrol borders or hover over capitals. They positioned themselves near fracture points, regions where history had shown systems failed first and consequences spread fastest. Always distant, always present, never demanding obedience. Slowly, the galaxy understood what humanity had become. Not conquerors, not rulers, a contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats. They promised no protection. Their mere presence changed behavior. Former Dominion commanders, those few left alive, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have erased them, and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than fear ever could. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by authority fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through charters or votes. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the chambers where authority once held sway, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could afford to forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse emerges from the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command, not to conquer, but to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.